Sherlock Holmes and the Phantom of Blackmoor Manor. Chapter 1. A Letter from the Countryside. It was a dreary morning in October 1891 when a peculiar silence hung over 221B Baker Street. Dr. John Watson sat by the fireplace, glancing occasionally at his friend Sherlock Holmes, who was deep in thought, his sharp eyes fixed on the foggy streets outside. Holmes's violin rested on the table, untouched, a sign, Watson thought, of his friend's restless boredom. The monotony was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson entered, holding a letter sealed with an elaborate crest. "For you, Mr. Holmes," she said, placing it on the table. Holmes opened it swiftly, his eyes scanning the contents with growing interest. "This," he said, handing the letter to Watson, "is most intriguing." Watson read aloud, "Mr. Holmes, I write to you in utter desperation. My son, Edward Blackmoor, has met an untimely death under circumstances most distressing. The local authorities insist it was an accident, but whispers of a family curse and a ghostly beast haunt the manor. I implore you to come to Blackmoor Manor and uncover the truth before more tragedy befalls us. Yours faithfully, Lady Margaret Blackmoor." Watson set the letter down, intrigued. "A curse? Surely you don't give credence to such tales, Holmes." "Of course not," Holmes replied, lighting his pipe. "But the death of a young nobleman, coupled with whispers of the supernatural, suggests an elaborate deception. A visit to Blackmoor Manor will surely prove enlightening." Within hours, Holmes and Watson were aboard a train heading into the English countryside. The journey took them through mist-shrouded fields and dark wooded hills. As the train neared its destination, Watson couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The countryside was beautiful, yet desolate, with a foreboding atmosphere that seemed to echo the letter's contents. Upon arriving at the small village of Blackmoor, Holmes and Watson were met by a coachman who introduced himself as Thomas, one of the Blackmoor Manor servants. "It's good you've come, Mr. Holmes," Thomas said, his voice low. "The manor's in a dreadful state. People say the curse is real, and after what happened to Lord Edward, even I'm not so sure anymore." "Superstition is often the tool of deception, Thomas," Holmes replied. "Take us to the manor." As they rode through the mist-laden moors, Thomas shared the tale of the so-called curse. "They say the Blackmoor family wronged someone long ago, so wronged they summoned a beast to haunt the family forever. At night you can hear it howling, and those who see it rarely live to tell the tale." "Convenient for the storyteller, wouldn't you say?" Holmes remarked dryly, his keen eyes taking in the surroundings. Soon, Blackmoor Manor loomed into view, a sprawling estate of grey stone, its walls weathered by centuries of storms. The building exuded both grandeur and gloom, its tall windows darkened like hollow eyes watching over the moors. Lady Margaret Blackmoor greeted them at the entrance, her face pale and drawn with grief. "Mr. Holmes, thank you for coming. I fear for my family. Edward's death was no accident. I am certain of it." Holmes inclined his head politely. "Rest assured, Lady Blackmoor, we shall uncover the truth." Inside, the manor was sombre, its once lavish halls marked by shadows and whispers. Lady Margaret led them to the study, where she recounted Edward's final moments. "He was found at the edge of the moor, his body mangled. They said it was an animal attack, but the footprints—" Her voice faltered. "They were not natural." Holmes leaned forward. "Footprints, you say? Were they preserved?" "They are still there," she replied. "The villagers won't go near the spot." "Excellent," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Watson, we have our starting point." As the clock struck midnight, Holmes and Watson prepared to brave the moors, unaware of the darkness and danger that awaited them. The shadow of Blackmoor Manor had only begun to reveal its secrets. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Beast. The morning dawned grey and heavy, with a chill mist clinging stubbornly to the moors. Inside Blackmoor Manor, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson prepared for their first investigation. Holmes, ever meticulous, donned his sturdy boots and secured his walking stick. Watson, armed with his revolver, followed his friend, both aware of the eerie reputation surrounding the moors. Lady Margaret met them in the dining room, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "Mr. Holmes," she began hesitantly, "before you go, there is something you should know. The curse of Blackmoor is not merely an idle tale. Generations ago, my ancestor, Sir Lionel Blackmoor, wronged a man who cursed our family in his dying breath. Since then, the beast has haunted us." Holmes raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Watson, sensing her growing agitation, asked gently, "And this beast, Lady Blackmoor, what do people say it looks like?" She swallowed nervously. "They say it is large, with glowing eyes and claws like scythes. Its howls are said to freeze the blood of any who hear them." "Fascinating," Holmes remarked dryly. "And yet I suspect such tales serve a purpose. Fear is a powerful weapon, Lady Blackmoor." Before she could respond, the door creaked open, and a wiry young man entered. "This is Henry Blackmoor, my late son's cousin," Lady Margaret explained. "He has been staying here since Edward's death." Henry extended a hand to Holmes and Watson. "I'm grateful you've come. The moors are no place for reason. Superstition rules here. Even I've heard the howls at night." "Have you now?" Holmes said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me, Henry, were you close to Edward?" A flicker of something, resentment perhaps, crossed Henry's face. "We were family, Mr. Holmes, that is all I'll say." Holmes said no more, but Watson noticed the subtle change in his expression. He filed it away as they prepared to leave for the site where Edward's body had been found. The moor was a vast, treacherous expanse of uneven ground, hidden pools of water, and thick fog that clung to every surface. As they approached the location, Thomas, the coachman, hesitated. "I'll go no farther, sirs. This place is cursed. I've seen too much to doubt it." "Wait here, then," Holmes replied curtly. "Watson and I will manage." The scene of Edward's death was marked by a crude wooden cross planted in the earth. Around it, the ground was churned up, as though by a great struggle. Holmes crouched, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the soil. "Here," he muttered, pointing to a set of tracks in the mud. Watson leaned in and frowned. "Those are unusual, too large for a dog, but not quite human." "Precisely," Holmes said, "and yet they bear the marks of artifice. Note the uniform depth and shape, manufactured, not natural. Someone has gone to great lengths to fabricate the illusion of a beast." Holmes produced a magnifying glass and examined a nearby thorn bush. There, caught in the brambles, was a torn piece of cloth. "This," he said, holding it up, "is from a cloak or coat, likely belonging to our perpetrator. And here, Watson, do you see this?" Watson followed Holmes's gaze to a small object half buried in the dirt. Holmes retrieved it, a locket engraved with the initials E.B. Edward Blackmoor. Watson asked, startled. "Undoubtedly," Holmes said, pocketing the locket. "But the question is, why was it left here? A careless error or a deliberate misdirection?" The faint sound of a distant howl broke the silence, sending a shiver down Watson's spine. Holmes stood, unperturbed. "The howls, Watson, are likely another piece of this elaborate ruse, a clever device perhaps to terrify and mislead." Watson glanced around nervously. "Holmes, these moors could hide anything or anyone. If this is a human scheme, they may still be watching us." "Then let them watch," Holmes replied calmly. They will soon learn that fear is no match for reason. As they made their way back to the manor, Holmes remained deep in thought. The oversized tracks, the torn fabric, the locket, all pieces of a puzzle he was beginning to assemble. Yet one thing troubled him: the precision of the plan. Whoever was behind this wanted the Blackmoor family, and anyone who dared to investigate, to believe in the beast. But to what end? That night, as Holmes and Watson sat in their room at the manor, a blood-curdling howl echoed through the corridors. Holmes glanced at Watson, his expression unreadable. "Our adversary is bold, Watson, but overconfidence is a weakness. Tomorrow we set a trap." Watson nodded, though unease gnawed at him. The moors were dark and full of secrets, but with Holmes leading the way, he clung to the hope that logic and reason would prevail. Chapter 3. Into the Mist. The following morning, the air around Blackmoor Manor was heavy with fog, so dense it seemed to seep into the stone walls. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson prepared for their next venture onto the moors. Holmes, ever methodical, packed a few essentials: a magnifying glass, a sturdy rope, and a small notebook. Watson, less assured of what they might encounter, tucked his revolver into his coat pocket. As they descended to the manor's main hall, Lady Margaret greeted them with evident worry. "You'll be careful, Mr. Holmes," she urged. "The moors are treacherous, and the beast is said to be most active in the early morning." "I assure you, Lady Blackmoor, we are prepared for all manner of danger," Holmes replied, his voice calm but resolute. Henry Blackmoor entered the hall, his face pale, but his demeanour less reserved than the day before. "I'll accompany you," he announced. "I know these moors better than anyone." Holmes studied him for a moment, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. "Very well," he said at last. "Your familiarity with the terrain may prove useful." The trio set out, leaving Watson to follow Henry's lead with some unease. The moors stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of mist, uneven ground, and shadowy shapes that seemed to shift as they moved. The stillness was punctuated only by the occasional call of a distant bird or the soft squelch of boots on damp earth. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated. He examined every patch of ground with care, his magnifying glass catching fragments of light through the fog. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to a trail of faint impressions in the mud. "These tracks are consistent with the ones we found near Edward's body. And note their direction, away from the manor." Henry frowned. "You think the beast, or whoever's behind this, fled the scene?" "Possibly," Holmes replied, crouching to inspect the prints. "But what strikes me as curious is their uniformity. Each step is identical in depth and spacing. A mechanical aid, perhaps?" Watson glanced around nervously. The landscape felt oppressively quiet, as if holding its breath. "Holmes," he said, "if these tracks are fabricated, where does the real culprit hide? Surely they'd need a vantage point to observe us, or their intended victim." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "A valid point, Watson. We must consider the geography of the moors. Look to the east. Those higher ridges would provide an excellent view of the manor and the surrounding land." Henry shifted uncomfortably. "The eastern ridge is dangerous. There are sinkholes and bogs that can swallow a man whole." Holmes's sharp eyes caught the hesitation in Henry's tone. "You seem familiar with the hazards of the moor, Mr. Blackmoor. Tell me, have you explored them often?" Henry avoided his gaze. "It's hard not to, living here all my life. But anyone with sense avoids venturing too far. It's not just the terrain. There are things out here best left undisturbed." Before Holmes could respond, a low, mournful howl echoed through the mist. Watson stiffened, his hand instinctively going to his revolver. The sound was unearthly, rising and falling like a lament carried on the wind. Holmes remained still, listening intently. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A whistle, perhaps, or a mechanical contraption mimicking a wolf's howl. The intervals are too precise to be natural." Henry looked alarmed. "You're saying it's a trick? But why?" "To instill fear," Holmes replied. "Fear clouds judgment and makes the supernatural appear plausible. The question, of course, is who benefits from such terror." Another howl split the air, closer this time. Watson scanned the horizon, his pulse quickening. "Holmes! Whatever it is, it's moving toward us." Holmes straightened, his expression calm but focused. "Then let us meet it." The sound of rustling grass reached them before the figure emerged, a hulking shape that loomed out of the fog with glowing eyes and a ghastly snarl. Watson's breath caught as he raised his revolver, but Holmes grabbed his arm. "Not yet, Watson," he said, his voice steady. "Observe." The figure charged forward, its movements unnaturally stiff. Holmes stepped to the side, letting the beast pass before snatching a handful of nearby brambles and flinging them under its feet. The creature stumbled, its glowing eyes flickering briefly before it regained balance and disappeared into the mist. Watson stared after it, his heart pounding. "Holmes, that thing, it wasn't natural." "No, Watson," Holmes agreed, brushing dirt from his hands. "But it is mortal. The glow of its eyes was a chemical effect, and its size exaggerated by clever construction. Our adversary is more inventive than I anticipated." Henry's face was pale, his hands trembling. "That was no man in disguise. It couldn't be." Holmes turned to him, his piercing gaze unyielding. "Fear makes us see what we expect, Mr. Blackmoor. What we encountered was a machine, a tool to frighten and mislead. The true danger lies not in the beast, but in its creator." As they made their way back to the manor, the fog seemed to thicken, as though the Moors themselves conspired to hide their secrets. Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and for the first time he wondered if even Holmes might find this mystery more treacherous than anticipated. Chapter 4. Secrets beneath the manor. The evening at Blackmoor Manor was oppressive, the air thick with unease. Holmes, Watson, and Henry returned from the moors, their boots caked with mud, and their thoughts weighed down by the encounter with the beast. While Watson retired to their shared quarters to clean up, Holmes requested a private word with Lady Margaret. The drawing-room was dimly lit, the flicker of the fireplace casting long shadows. Lady Margaret sat stiffly, her hands clutching a faded photograph of Edward. Holmes, seated across from her, spoke with a calm yet firm tone. "Lady Blackmoor," he began, "it is imperative that you tell me everything about the history of your family and this so-called curse. Spare me no detail, however trivial it may seem." Lady Margaret hesitated, then sighed deeply. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. The Blackmoors have lived here for generations, but ours is a history marred by tragedy. It is said that centuries ago my ancestor, Sir Lionel Blackmoor, cheated a trusted ally out of his land. The man cursed him, vowing that his descendants would be haunted by a beast of vengeance." "Curious," Holmes remarked, leaning forward. "This legend, I suspect, has been perpetuated deliberately. By whom and for what purpose remains to be seen." "There is more," Lady Margaret added, her voice trembling. "Edward confided in me shortly before his death that he had found something hidden beneath the manor. He refused to explain, but he seemed afraid. He spoke of shadows and betrayal." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Beneath the manor, you say? And yet no mention of this discovery was made to anyone else." "I begged him to tell me more, but he was insistent that I should not involve myself," she said, her voice breaking. "Then he was gone." Holmes stood abruptly, his mind clearly racing. "Thank you, Lady Blackmoor. You've been most helpful." Watson joined Holmes in the library a short while later, finding his friend poring over an old map of the manor. "Watson," Holmes said without looking up, "did you know that Blackmoor Manor is built on the ruins of an older structure, a fortified abbey, to be precise?" "I can't say I did," Watson replied, intrigued. "Do you believe Edward's discovery is linked to these ruins?" "I would stake my reputation on it," Holmes replied. He pointed to the map. "See here, an old servant's passage leads to what was once the abbey's wine cellar. That is where we must go." The two men armed themselves with lanterns and made their way to the cellar, avoiding the gaze of the servants. The passage was narrow and damp, its walls coated with moss. The air grew colder as they descended, the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily. Holmes stopped abruptly. "Here," he said, shining his lantern on the stone floor. "Do you see this, Watson?" Watson peered closer. A faint outline of a trapdoor was visible beneath years of grime. Holmes produced a small crowbar from his coat and pried it open. The heavy stone lid creaked, revealing a set of ancient steps leading further down. The chamber below was cold and silent, its walls lined with shelves containing rotting barrels and decayed crates. But it was a table in the centre of the room that caught their attention. Upon it lay an assortment of objects, a half-finished mechanical contraption, sheets of paper covered in blueprints, and a journal. Holmes picked up the journal, flipping through its brittle pages. "Fascinating," he murmured. "It appears Edward was documenting his suspicions. He believed someone was using the curse to frighten the family and possibly eliminate him." Watson pointed to a set of tools on the table. "Holmes, these look like they could be used to construct, well, something like the beast we encountered." "Indeed," Holmes said grimly. "Edward must have stumbled upon this operation and realized its implications. It cost him his life." As they prepared to leave, a faint sound reached their ears, a low, guttural growl. Watson froze, his revolver ready, but Holmes placed a hand on his arm. "Not a beast, Watson," he whispered, "a man drawn to protect his secrets." Footsteps echoed above, signaling they were no longer alone. Holmes extinguished his lantern, plunging them into darkness. "Quickly, Watson," he hissed. "We must retreat for now, but tomorrow the true nature of this conspiracy will be laid bare." Chapter 5. The Beast Revealed. The following evening, Sherlock Holmes gathered the household in the grand dining hall of Blackmoor Manor. The room was dimly lit, with flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the walls. Holmes's demeanour was sharp and focused, his piercing gaze scanning each face in turn. Lady Margaret, Henry Blackmoor, the nervous housekeeper Mrs. Givens, and a handful of the remaining servants. Dr. Watson stood by his side, his revolver concealed, but ready. "Tonight," Holmes began, his voice firm, "we shall bring this mystery to its conclusion. The so-called beast of Blackmoor is no spectre, nor is it a curse. It is a creation designed to deceive and destroy. And I believe the culprit responsible is among us." A murmur rippled through the room. Henry Blackmoor shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Lady Margaret looked both relieved and terrified. "You believe someone here killed my son?" Lady Margaret asked, her voice trembling. "Precisely," Holmes replied. "And in doing so they sought to perpetuate the legend of the Blackmoor beast to conceal their true motives. I have already uncovered the tools used to fabricate the creature, hidden beneath this very manor." Mrs. Givens gasped, clutching a rosary in her hands. "I told you this place was cursed." "Not cursed, madam," Holmes said with a faint smile, "but cursed with greed and cunning. Someone engineered the beastly costume, the mechanical howls, and the monstrous footprints to terrify and mislead. My investigation revealed the use of a clever chemical compound to create the glowing eyes of the beast and modified footwear to craft the prints we saw on the moors." Henry stood abruptly. "That's preposterous! Why would anyone go to such lengths? What could they possibly gain?" Holmes fixed him with a steely glare. "What, indeed?" "The answer lies in inheritance, Mr. Blackmoor. Lord Edward was the rightful heir to the family fortune and the manor. His death leaves you next in line, does it not?" The room fell silent. Henry's face reddened, but he laughed nervously. "You think I killed Edward? That's absurd. I've lived here my whole life. Why would I harm my own cousin?" "For wealth and power," Holmes replied coolly. "But your guilt is not proven by motive alone. There is evidence." He reached into his pocket and retrieved a torn piece of fabric and the locket engraved with E.B. "This fabric matches the cloak you were seen wearing the night of Edward's death, Mr. Blackmoor. And this locket was found near his body, though it was not Edward who dropped it. It was you, in your haste to stage the scene." Henry's laughter ceased, replaced by a stony silence. Holmes continued, "Your scheme was clever, but you underestimated me. When Watson and I ventured into the moors last night, we encountered your beast. A mechanical contraption disguised as a monstrous creature operated by you to keep suspicion away from yourself." Henry's composure crumbled. "You have no proof I was there!" he shouted, his voice rising in desperation. Holmes raised a hand, silencing him. "On the contrary, I do. After our encounter, I recovered traces of the same chemical used in the glowing eyes of the beast, traces that lead directly to the workshop beneath the manor, where I found tools marked with your initials." At this, Lady Margaret let out a cry of despair. "Henry, is this true? Did you—" "Kill Edward?" Henry's shoulders slumped, and his eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "I had no choice," he blurted. "Edward planned to sell the manor, to squander our legacy. I had to protect what was rightfully ours." "Protect it by committing murder?" Holmes said, his voice sharp. "You sought to gain the estate through deceit and terror, but your actions have undone you." As Holmes spoke, the door burst open, and 2 constables entered, summoned by a message Holmes had sent earlier in the day. Henry attempted to flee, but Watson blocked his path, drawing his revolver. The constables quickly restrained him, and he was led away, his protests echoing down the corridor. With Henry gone, a heavy silence descended upon the room. Lady Margaret wept quietly, and the servants whispered among themselves. Holmes addressed them all with measured calm. The curse of Blackmoor was nothing but a tale exploited by a desperate man. Let this be a lesson. Fear is a powerful tool, but truth will always prevail. Later that night, as Watson and Holmes prepared to leave the manor, a mournful howl echoed across the moors. Watson glanced at Holmes, uneasy. "Surely that was—" Holmes smiled faintly. "An owl, Watson, nothing more." But as they rode away, he cast one last glance at the shadowy moors, his expression unreadable. The case was closed, yet the moors still held their secrets. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Blackmoor. The morning after Henry Blackmoor's arrest, the atmosphere in Blackmoor Manor was one of both relief and sorrow. Lady Margaret, though deeply shaken by the revelations, expressed her gratitude to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson as they prepared to leave. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice heavy with emotion, "you have uncovered the truth and saved my family from further ruin, but I can't help feeling as though this curse, whether real or fabricated, will haunt us forever." Holmes inclined his head respectfully. "Lady Blackmoor, curses thrive on belief. By exposing the truth behind this so-called beast, we have dismantled its power. The rest, madam, lies in your hands." Lady Margaret nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. Watson, ever the gentleman, reassured her with a kind word before following Holmes outside. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the vast barren expanse of the moors in daylight. The chill that clung to the land seemed less oppressive now, though Watson still shivered as they waited for their carriage. "Holmes," Watson began, breaking the silence, "it troubles me that Henry could go to such lengths, to exploit the fear of his own family, to murder his cousin. It's monstrous." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "Greed, Watson, is a powerful motivator. It drives men to commit unspeakable acts, often under the guise of righteousness. Henry convinced himself that his actions were for the greater good, but his justification does not absolve his crime." Watson nodded, but his gaze lingered on the moors. "And yet, there is one thing that unsettles me still. The howls we heard, if they were merely a device Henry used to perpetuate the illusion of the beast, who or what made the sound we heard last night after his capture?" Holmes smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "The human mind, Watson, is prone to seeking patterns, even where none exist. It is possible the sound was natural, a creature of the moors, nothing more. But if it was not, then perhaps we must accept that there are mysteries even I cannot explain." Watson regarded his friend with a mix of admiration and frustration. "You delight in leaving threads unresolved, don't you?" Holmes chuckled softly. "Only when it suits the narrative, my dear Watson." As the carriage carried them away from Blackmoor Manor, Holmes seemed unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the rolling landscape. Watson, sensing his friend's contemplative mood, refrained from interrupting. It was only when they passed a solitary figure walking along the moors that Holmes stirred. "Driver," he called out, "stop the carriage." The driver obliged, and Holmes stepped out, striding toward the figure, a stooped old man with a weathered face and piercing eyes. He carried a bundle of firewood and leaned heavily on a walking stick. "Good day to you, sir," Holmes said. "Might I have a word?" The man eyed him warily, but nodded. "Aye, if you've a reason." Holmes gestured toward the moors. "You've lived here a long time, I take it. Tell me, have you ever seen or heard anything out of the ordinary on these moors? Something others might call supernatural?" The old man's expression darkened. "The beast, you mean?" He spat on the ground. "A tale to scare children and fools. But there's truth in the land itself. These moors have a way of keeping secrets. I've heard things, howls, whispers in the night, but I've seen no beast." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you believe?" The man shrugged. "I believe the moors are what they are, wild, untamed, and full of things we don't understand. Not everything needs an explanation, sir." Holmes thanked the man and returned to the carriage, his expression unreadable as they resumed their journey. Later, back in London, Watson reflected on the case as he wrote his account. The mystery of Blackmoor Manor had been solved, its culprit unmasked and brought to justice. And yet a lingering sense of unease remained. The moors, with their haunting cries and shifting mists, seemed to defy the rational clarity Holmes so valued. Watson looked up from his desk to find Holmes seated by the window, his pipe in hand, gazing out at the city. "Holmes," he said, "do you ever wonder if we truly solved the case? Or if the moors still hold secrets we missed?" Holmes turned to him, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The beauty of the unknown, Watson, is that it humbles even the keenest mind. Perhaps the moors hold their secret still, or perhaps in solving the case we uncovered more than we intended. Either way, the world spins on and we move to the next mystery." Satisfied with the response, Watson returned to his writing, though a faint howl echoed in his memory, leaving a question unanswered. For Holmes, perhaps, the case was closed. For Watson, the shadow of Blackmoor Manor lingered still.